what's important about our campaign is that the lifeblood of the Radical Independence campaign are the local radical independence groups. These are the groups, these are the organisations that manage to mobilise hundreds in communities to go out and canvass. These are the groups, the length and breadth of Scotland, that contribute towards the ideas, that contribute towards the strategy, that contribute towards the momentum that this campaign has managed to build. And with that, it's a pleasure to introduce from the Aberdeen Radical Independence campaign, who brought a coach down today, by the way, Myshele Haywood.
Thank you. And before I start, I just want to say that I haven't colluded with everybody else to write my speech, but somehow we all ended up saying the same thing. But thank you for letting me speak to you today. This is an amazing sight. I'd like you to all just take a moment and look around. Make some eye contact. Did you ever think you'd have so many comrades in one place? It's easy to feel alone when we're challenging the status quo. But right here in this room, there's thousands of people who are all fighting on the same side. Every single person in this room has their own story and their own vision for the Scotland they want to see. Some people here have been activists for decades. Some have just joined the struggle. Some people here call themselves socialists, anarchists, feminists, Greens. Some of us don't use any labels at all. But what unites us is the shared vision for a better Scotland and a better world. So you'll have noticed this isn't an Aberdeen accent. So why on earth is an American speaking at the Scottish Radical Independence Conference? I can tell you it's not what I expected last year when I was out knocking doors and organizing public meetings. And it's definitely not what I expected 14 years ago when I was an exchange student struggling with culture shock. I did a year abroad because I wanted to see how people lived in other countries. I came to Scotland because I liked the music. Wow. I had no idea that the Scottish Parliament had just been established, but that year there was a buzz about what might be achieved. Here was something that the people had demanded and won. Back in the US, George W. Bush lost the popular vote but still became president. Scotland wasn't perfect, but it seemed like a country with its sanity intact. The National Health Service, statutory maternity leave, no guns. Maybe it was the weight of the contrast that got me thinking about words like capitalism, oppression, social justice. I went to my first big demo, a blockade at Faz Lane. I learned about things like the Zapatistas. The WTO, consensus organizing. My first year in Scotland radicalized me. I'm lucky they let me back in the US. When I got home, I was excited about my new calling in life. I'm an activist now, I told a friend. He laughed and said, Myshele, you've always been an activist. Did you ever have a moment like that when you realized something really obvious about yourself? I think the referendum has sparked a lot of those moments. People who care what happened to their neighbors suddenly realized they were political. People who wanted to help others suddenly realized they were activists. People who thought maybe we should be nice to each other suddenly realized they were radical. I don't think it's particularly radical what we're talking about here. Let's not kill each other. Let's not dump poisons into our air and water. Let's share our resources and try to make sure that everyone has a decent, dignified life. How fucked up is our current system that it requires radical change just to meet the basic standards of basic human values? So speaking of values, next week I'm taking the Life in the UK test so I can apply for permanent residence. I don't get a vote either. According to the study guide, everyone in the UK should treat others with fairness. I guess the Tories never had to take the test. After my year abroad, I was overwhelmed with the scale of America's problems. In a country of 350 million people, where do you even start? It felt like America was too big and too broken for one person to make a difference. So I came back to Scotland, and I've worked hard to be able to stay here. I don't have Scottish ancestry, but this is where I want my future to be. And at its heart, this kind of question is exactly what the referendum was about. Beyond questions of constitutional arrangements and political parties, the referendum was an opportunity for the people of Scotland to think about who they are and what kind of future they want. And look what happened when people got the chance to think about a different future. They started to ask questions about what's happening right now. They started to pull back the curtain. No rhetoric required, just hard facts. But facts are dangerous. Poll after poll showed that when people got away from the lies of the mainstream media and got themselves informed, they became disillusioned with the status quo, because the status quo isn't good enough. We live in one of the richest countries in the world, but thousands of families are relying on food banks. That's not good enough. There's unlimited funding for war and nuclear weapons, but our public services have to scrape and squeeze. That's not good enough. The millionaires get tax cuts and the millions get ignored. That is not good enough. So a movement emerged that covered the entire political spectrum. It wasn't about the SNP or the Yes campaign. Yes took on a life of its own. There were Yes groups for everything you could think of. Youth for Yes and pensioners for Yes. Women for Yes. Asians, Poles, English people for Yes. Farmers and business people and taxi drivers and nurses and artists for Yes. There was so much energy and enthusiasm. It felt like a brand new politics was taking shape right before our eyes. For many of us, it was the most exciting thing we'd ever experienced. But then we lost the referendum. Of course, there were victories too. In Aberdeen, we had a little victory just yesterday. Back in March, the council sent out letters telling everyone to vote no. So we collected over 100 complaints and delivered them to the council offices in a wheelbarrow. We also sent copies to the Public Services Commission, the Public Standards Commission. Yesterday, we heard they're investigating 7 councillors for misuse of public funds. More broadly, 45% was an incredible achievement, especially in the face of the entire British establishment. There were unprecedented levels of engagement and voter registration. We won in 4 local areas, in 4 local authorities, including Scotland's largest, most diverse city. And we came close in a lot of other areas too. After the no vote, rather than switching off, tens of thousands of people have joined pro-independence parties. And now, 2 months post-referendum, polls are showing that many no voters have realized their mistake. So where does that leave the Radical Independence campaign? Without independence, how can we possibly work for radical social change? It's not going to be easy. If only we could get lots of activists all together in one room. For too long, the left in Scotland was fragmented and prone to bickering. But the first Radical Independence Conference 2 years ago created space for the left to come together and work towards something we could all agree on. We can't lose sight of that. Whatever details may divide us, there are bigger and more fundamental principles that unite us. We don't have to agree on the details to fight for social justice, sustainability, equality, democracy, and peace. We don't have to agree on the details to stand in solidarity and fight for radical social change. Now, I have a lot in common with the folks over at the SNP event today, and I admire Nicola Sturgeon and the Aberdeen MSPs we worked with during the campaign. But I think RIC is more important than ever. Our job is to keep up the pressure and keep pulling the debate to the left, because we know that the full forces of neoliberal capitalism are trying to drag everything to the right. We've got the momentum now. Back in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher said there's no such thing as society, but that kind of thinking is starting to break down. There is such a thing as society, and that means society can change. The false promise of hyper-individualism and endless competition looks more and more hollow, and people are looking for alternatives. Even the No campaign talked about social change. But it's up to us to keep social change on the political agenda, and more than that, it's up to us to get out of the halls of power and into real communities in the real lives of real people. Social change is not just an intellectual exercise. The working class estates of Scotland are not just places where we can canvass when we're looking for votes. I'm not going to tell you how to go about creating the change we all want to see, but there's dozens of speakers here today with plenty of ideas about how to start. The rest is up to you. The strength of RIC is its diversity. It's attracted people from all sorts of political movements and brought us together into something cohesive and effective. It's shown us we can put aside our differences and work together. We're not a political party, so we don't have to toe a party line. There's no central hierarchy, so local groups have autonomy to do what makes sense where they are. Realize they're activists, they've realized they don't have to ask for anyone's permission. If you want to see something happen, it's up to you to make it happen. But that's incredibly liberating. It's also possible, maybe for the first time in decades. We didn't win the referendum, but Scotland has changed in our collective imagination. It's become a place that can change. It's our job to make sure that it does change. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Myshele.